So first of all, thank you everybody for joining. My name is Charlie O'Donnell. I am a partner at Brooklyn Bridge Ventures, and this is how I raised my seed. And what we're aiming to do here is basically help people get a little more transparency on how this whole process works. So a lot of times you hear a founder on a panel talking about how a fundraising happened, and the period of time gets really shrunk down into, so I reached out to a couple investors, a handful of them got excited, and we closed and we were off into the races, right? And like that is like a 2-sentence blip for what is a 6, 9, 12-month process, and you don't get to hear how it happened. You don't get to hear sort of all of the gory, nitty-gritty details of it. And a lot of founders start off not knowing the basics, right? Just how many people should I reach out to? How long did it take? How did I know whether or not they're going to be able to sort of come to a yes? So that's what we're here to talk about. And we'll try and get through it in as much sort of tactical details as possible. And what I'm going to do is I'll ask for some introductions, but I want to go through a little bit chronologically, sort of, from company ideation to thinking about raising to getting started, sort of, kind of all the way to close. And Tiffany, I'll ask you to sort of kick things off. If you could just give us sort of 1 or 2 sentences on what your company does, and just how'd you start? Like, what was the origination of the and just like, where were you? Were you working on something else full time, like all that sort of stuff?
Sure. Well, thank you for having me.
No problem.
And congrats, Stas. I know that everything's not close, but it sounds like you're very close. So congratulations. It's a huge, huge milestone. My life's work is advancing women and girls. That's pretty much why I'm on the planet. So every job I've had, every dollar I've donated, everything I've ever written, every social post, except for a couple cute ones about my kids, has been all about how do we harness women's talent and ingenuity for the benefit of everybody. The most important thing, though, that I've ever done is just say yes to almost every woman that reaches out to me, certainly up until about a year ago. I did this for several years. Right before this, I was working at another tech startup called Levo that was very focused on millennial women and helping them to elevate their careers. The Crew is basically a very simple platform that matches circles of women who collaborate to meet their life goals together. I would meet with women every Tuesday and Thursday at 9, 10, and 11 a.m. for many years, just because I'm obsessed with hearing women's stories. And I made a few observations and decided that I would start evangelizing. I'm a preacher's kid. So I would start evangelizing this idea of a crew, because I am the cumulative investment of a lot of people. And I think that having an accountability circle is very important. And it wasn't until January 2018, after several years of connecting with women and talking to them about the importance of having a crew, that I got some pushback from a woman who said that she understood theoretically this idea, the concept, but that she didn't think I was sensitive to the amount of work that went into having a circle like this. And then she walked me through the workflow, everything from getting access to the cocktail party or the conference or the event, awkwardly introducing herself to all these strangers, collecting the business cards. She pointed out that she had to take time off of her job to meet me at this like really beautiful women's co-working space at 10 a.m. on a Tuesday. And, the sum was, I came to you to get support and guidance, and you've basically given me all of this stuff to do. I have like a full-time job and 3 kids and a mom with a diagnosis, and I don't have time to do what you're describing. And that for me was what I call a Tiffany's epiphany moment. Some people call them aha moments, where I realized, oh, there's a need I obviously am the best person to solve it. And that's how the crew was born. So, I should start by saying I was not someone who went out to be the founder of a venture-backed company. I'm just someone who cares deeply about women. I saw a problem, and once I have some insight into what someone needs, I'm ready, willing, and able to do everything that I can. So we went to market. I didn't even know that language at the time, but we went to market with a 3-minute video of me sitting on my couch, basically saying, I'm Tiffany Dufu. I've done a lot of great stuff, but the secret to my success is my crew. If you need one, click here. Women applied. It was a SurveyMonkey application. Hundreds of women started applying to this thing called the crew. I put a price tag on it right away because to me was my only litmus test for whether or not I was actually solving a problem. It was an arbitrary amount of $499 a year, and we were off to the races from there.
Gotcha. That's fantastic. Rachael, I know a little bit of your story, and I'm trying to figure out what the first iteration, sort of how you went from being in your previous job to I'm going to start something, and what it is that you're doing now.
Yeah. So the dime, it's a very long story, but the dime story I'll start with. So, I'll start with what we do, because that's easier to say. So, everything that we do at Opus originates with this really terrible statistic, which is that 80% of the global workforce doesn't sit at a desk all day, and yet 99% of VC dollars are going to the 20% who do. And what that means is that the tech that's being funded is ignoring this majority workforce a lot of the time. And so our mission at Opus is to build the most accessible platform frontline. And we're starting with training, which is my background. So we help skill workforce, their hourly workforce, so that they keep their people and train them quickly and reduce their training overhead. And we do that workers over text message. My background is long and winding and of the food industry. I spent my whole life in restaurants. My mom restaurants, my grandpa owned a barbecue chain, and as the story goes, I spent trying to get out of restaurants. Also the industry that college loans and was the first to welcome me here and give me a job when I moved to New York. So it's a really important thing with a lot of problems to solve. So the origin of this was in a different company name when I met you, Charlie, kayaking one day. And I Annie Meyer, and was basically at night teach English as a second language. I have my sort of, yes. And Charlie, I remember VCs and Stas, and I do this thing and I go books in New York City, and you're like, people. And that was the beginning of 2 to 3 years.
Gotcha. Looks like we have a few bandwidth issues, but we caught the beginning of ESL. Maybe, Rachael, can you still hear us?
Yeah.
And Tiffany? No. We'll ask Tiffany to restart, but we'll shift over to Stas, and hopefully we'll improve the bandwidth issues that we're having. But Stas, what is your business and what's the origin story?
Sure. So first, thanks for having me, and it's gonna be hard to top or live up to the last two intros. But essentially, my background. Security. I've always been tinkering with computers ever since I was a kid. It's all I've ever done. and it's what I pursued as an adult, and it's what I'm pursuing now, and it's what I've always done. So the concept came from working at a few different organizations, solving the same problems over and over, and I became really good at identifying where those issues are in different size organizations, what to focus on, and how the bigger picture and solving those problems. Those problems were focusing on the fundamentals of the business from an information security perspective, and not looking at the bells and whistles, but just focusing on the fundamentals, and building out teams to leverage my knowledge and other parts of the industry to really build robust systems and platforms for these organizations. I usually had about an 18-month window when I was working at one organization or another, and then I'd switch to another one, and I would literally just rinse and repeat the same thing over and over again. It got to a point where it was October 2019, where I decided to take a leap of faith, and I shamelessly promoted myself to some of the people that I know in this industry. I got a couple of consultancy contracts with them. And I showed them this product that I was working on, which basically leveraged everything that I was doing for these previous companies, and we put it all into one easy to use package. And we started targeting smaller sized organizations, so companies that tend to not have the resources to hire dedicated full-time employees in the information security space, because they're hard to get, they're very expensive. So what we were offering is a platform that you could put in that could potentially replace those, could potentially avoid the need of having those people, but still having the resources and the capability of being able to solve those problems, because they would have us and the tool that we were working on to be able to solve the problems. So one thing led to another, and it was, I think it was July last year. We were up to 4 clients. We were just expanding. And we were, it was difficult to keep up with the demand. And then we thankfully got an intro to Charlie.
Gotcha. So just to sort of snake back around and let's go back to that summer. So at some point you're saying, okay, well, there's demand here. I can't keep up with it.
Yeah.
I may need some money. How did you even sort of, did you know about the venture capital world? Did you, were you aware of sort of like who the VCs were? What was that initial search of like, I need to reach out to some people and I think here's what I need to put out to them. Like where did you go?
So this was a conversation where myself and Simon, who's the co-founder, would go around in circles. So we would, we'd hear every other day on one platform or another, somebody like developed a Google button that connects Facebook to LinkedIn, and then they got like $100 million in venture funding. But we could never figure out how they were doing this. So we, in the moments that we did have spare time, we get together, we try and figure out who we could contact, how this works, what's involved here. And it was, I wouldn't say it's so much a rabbit hole, more of a shallow grave, if you will, for us, because we could never make the connections and find the people to help us. So we would just continue doing the consultancy work to help build the product and get it in front of customers. And it was really when we started getting into the U.S. market, we had a couple. We were confident enough to start showing the product to other people, where one thing led essentially, we had some contacts that we were showing the product to, trying to get into certain organizations, and we had a friend that introduced us to a couple of VCs. But it was just fortunate that we were in this space and we were working on something that people wanted. Otherwise, I found it really difficult to actually figure out how the VC space works without having a connection.
And just to point clarity, right?
Yeah.
The person that introduced us is not necessarily a close connection of mine. It's somebody that like I met through the community quite a while ago.
Yep.
Probably haven't run into in quite a number of years, but I wound up getting kind of a random email saying, hey, here's this company. Is this kind of thing that you would sort of take a look at? And like that was enough to even start talking. It wasn't like trying to figure out who's the best recommender, whose word am I going to take. It was just enough to, get in the door.
Yep. I think your initial response to the email I sent you was explain to me how this is not a consultancy, and then and then it took a little while to convince you. But yeah.
Well, I mean, but at the time it was previously.
Yeah. No, totally. Yeah, we were bootstrapping this whole thing. Yeah, and that's how we were doing it. Yeah.
Gotcha. So, Tiffany, how much did you know about the venture world? And when you got all these signups, at what point did you think, like, I might need some money for this? And where did you look for that money?
Yeah. No, when I launched the crew, I didn't know what venture capital was. I had had an experience with venture capital, but not enough that I really understood deeply, like, what it really meant. I felt that we needed to raise capital after about 3 months after having matched the first round, the first class of members in the crew. I didn't at the time know how to turn off the apply button. So people just kept applying to the crew. And I knew that I didn't have the resources to continue to match and onboard them. My life's work is advancing women and girls. They're all these women, they're not asking for a Lamborghini or a handbag. They just want human connection. And so I felt a responsibility to figure out, how am I going to capitalize this? How am I going to get more funding? So I just started Googling and read enough articles to know that if I had a company that had a bit of traction and had some demand, that venture capital was an option. I started listening to a podcast called The Pitch that I pretty much obsessed over for a month. I just binge listened to different episodes to try to prepare myself for this process. When I said I'm the cumulative investment of other people, I mean that I've had a lot of mentors and sponsors. And so I have a bit of a formula if I'm trying to do something I've never done before, which is to go find someone who can usher me, who can basically demystify the process and who can make connections and open doors to the right people. And I definitely needed that because I wasn't even going to run into somebody like Charlie kayaking. I don't even kayak.
Anybody could come.
So I created a profile for a sponsor. I had done this before in my life. I read enough to know that this was likely going to be a man. It was likely going to be a white man. It was likely going to be someone who had some experience in Silicon Valley, either as an operator. I kind of had a profile. You would have thought I was looking for another husband for about, a month or so. Anytime somebody asked me, can I help you with something? Or what do you need help with? I'd be like, I am looking for somebody like this. And eventually I ran into someone who invited me to a dinner party. And I said, I know this is weird, but I have a profile. Can I read this to you? And is somebody like this going to be at the dinner? And she said, yes. And it was a guy named Evan Cohen who became an amazing sponsor and took me on and demystified the process in a very practical way. So Charlie, to your point about you don't know how the sausage gets made, I would go to a meeting. I would come out of the meeting. I would call Evan. He would say, what did they ask you? I would tell him. He would say, what did you say? I would tell him, and he would say, okay, this is why they asked you this. Never say that again. Okay, that was a great answer. This is why it's not a great answer. Okay, no, don't follow up with them. They do not have any dry powder. He basically walked me through it for about the first 10 meetings. He did make some introductions, but I do need to give a shout out to BetaWorks. They and Bloomberg Beta co-led my first round, and BetaWorks, I didn't have an intro, and I submitted my deck cold to their site. And Peter Rojas much was drawn like the short straw that day. So he probably had to go through everything that gets submitted. I can't even imagine what they have to go through. And he saw it and he gave me a call and said, hey, I want to talk to you. I think this might be interesting. So it is possible to get venture capital without an intro and through, submitting your deck cold to a site.
Gotcha. I am going to change my title to holder of the short straw because that is the only straw at a single VC firm. So, that's I should just have Peter go through my inbox basically. Rachael, a little slightly different question, and I'd love for you to share because I've advised people to do this. based on the way you worked those early board meetings, and actually, Tiffany, I'll ask just one quick question. When you connected with Evan, did he come in and say, okay, like, I do this, it costs X, here's the equity piece, all of this sort of stuff? He was just doing it.
Are you kidding me? No, it wasn't until after I raised the first round. I raised a pre-seed. It was $1 million in the summer of 2019. It was after I raised it that Evan said to me, okay, now it's time that you understand what an advisor is. And that Evan explained to me that there are people who do this and actually get compensated through equity. And I was like, oh, I didn't even know that. Of course, you're amazing. You did this for me for, out of the goodness of your heart. And he's my only advisor now.
Right. Cool. So yeah, I'll let that be a sort of heads up to anybody who, is thinking about like, how do I find advisors? I can't, pay anybody or whatever. Is it like he did a ton of work for you before he asked you for anything, right? Rachael, you convened a group to sort of help you in the early days sort of think about model and finances. Could you tell us a little bit about like that process and how it was helpful?
Yeah, I mean, I'll start by saying I think in retrospect, I could have done it a lot better. Everyone to listen to what made. So my bandwidth is
we can hear you. We can't see you, but hopefully the video.
If you can hear me. I knew, and I asked once a month with me for, I think it was like 6 months or a year. And the good thing I was getting back for the first time, that wasn't customers. So we bootstrapped to start. The hard part about it is that I didn't know anything about proper. So that was the challenge. And an advisory board, you need to make sure you educate yourself on some friends and around to be a resource to anyone here around what that means. It was helpful to me because some other folks were in the industry at the time, so they could offer. Charlie, you were super financial side. I had never built a P&L. He was sitting down with me saying, like, let's do this. Here's why it's important. And so that was really helpful. And so everyone knows this. That was before I had raised a cent. I didn't know if I wanted to raise money. I just needed helpful, smart people around me.
Yeah, and the one thing I remember coming out of that that session is just something about identifying the amount of money that you were looking for and needed. And I think what happens a lot of times early on is there are these gaps where you say, okay, I can accomplish this much if I had this much money now, but I could do this much more if I had another, and sometimes it's about hiring your first employee or building a piece of technology. And I remember coming out of that exercise that you were charging customers monthly at the time. You had some sort of, restaurant groups. And the one thing that just came out of that very basic exercise was that, like, they were all willing to, they were all had budgeted you in for the year. But maybe we should just ask them to pay up front as a form of financing.
Yeah, and a lot of them did. Like, that's how I had really strong runway for 24 months just by asking customers to pay up front. And I gave them a kickback, right? We gave them like 5% off, a lot for hours. And we sold big contracts. I'm not, this is and I will share that. But, don't feel pressured to raise money when you have coming in, have help you solve the problem if it's not a huge. I wanted to just I had a cash flow problem. I just needed to make sure I had a little bank in order to get some projects up and running.
Gotcha. So, Tiffany, when you started reaching out, so you reached out to BetaWorks cold, and how many people did you reach out to at once? Like, what was that funnel like? I'm sure they probably weren't the only, maybe they were the first people you reached out to, but just how many people were in the top of the funnel and get to that first raise?
It's a good question because I've since raised my seed. I raised the pre-seed in the summer of 2019. I raised a seed this past summer. And I, of course, learned from the first time and did it differently the second time around. The first time, I didn't really understand the concept of momentum, Charlie. So I just kind of ad hoc would reach out to people as I learned about them, as I discovered them on their website, as someone made an introduction. And I didn't understand the value of kind of truncating meetings in such a way that you could get back to people and let them know how either other conversations were going or that you could move people toward your own goal. I basically didn't have any agency over the process. And that meant that it took a long time to really get someone to say yes, because investors like to be a part of a club, not necessarily to be the first mover. Peter was a game changer because he was the first VC to say, no, I'm backing this. I will see something here. And that then created momentum for other folks. I was able to say BetaWorks is in. And then it only took a few weeks actually to go back to other people who I'd spoken to and to get them in. But I would say from the time that I had the first meeting to the time that BetaWorks said I'm in, about 4 months went by.
And what was that 4-month process like in 4 months?
Yeah, I basically started with just a spreadsheet. I would, Evan had some names. Once I got access to one person and had a meeting with them, then that took me into a rabbit hole of other meetings and other people. And I spent most of my time either in meetings. So this was in 2019, in the summer of 2019, before the pandemic, when I raised the first round. I did the whole thing virtually. That was another thing. I didn't know that I was supposed to get dressed and get in a taxi or get on a plane. And it was clear to me that it was a numbers game, that I was gonna have to meet with a lot of people and that the vast majority of people were going to say no. So I didn't understand the value of meeting all of those people in person. So I was able to do a lot of 30-minute phone calls. And I spent the other, chunk of my time outside of running the company managing all of the people who had made any kind of introduction or would helped me in any kind of way. I spent just as much time meeting with investors as I did updating Evan. And then if somebody else came in or somebody else was helpful, letting them know how the meeting went, because I had had an experience in the past with mentorship and sponsorship where people want to help people that they know they're going to get a return on the investment. And so getting back to people and expressing gratitude and letting them know how things went would keep you top of mind so that as they were in other meetings and they were living their life, they would have Tiffany, Dufu, and the crew, and that would prompt them to make more introductions. So I spent a lot of time just managing people in an ecosystem that I wanted to help me outside of meeting with people and changing the deck, unfortunately, multiple times.
Gotcha. Speaking of changing the deck multiple times, Stas, you could probably almost see that was coming your way.
I totally saw that was coming. So I'm actually really glad you said what you just said, because part of doing this today, I was just wondering if people had similar experiences. I know, I've had a lot of back and forth with Charlie, but just to hear, the 4 months is almost kind of reassuring, because that's how long it's also taken us to get to where we are with this whole process. I found that we did all of this virtually as well. So I think there's a lot to be said about having someone in the room and being able to read body language, and not having that, I think is really difficult. And it definitely was a numbers game for us as well. But
Stas, let's talk a little bit about the time period where, like, where I said, hey, I'm interested.
Yeah.
We go out to other people, and sort of how the deck and story sort of iterated, and how the focus changed.
Yeah. So I think when we first started speaking, it was late August, I think, or sorry, mid August, I think, is when we first started speaking. I mean, we really had to narrow what our story was, right? I mean, we were at that time, we were kind of just running around, getting new clients, trying to maintain the ones we had, gain new ones. We had client decks, but no VC decks to pitch. We didn't know what that was what that was supposed to look like. So we had to recut it multiple times and change the angle multiple times. It took me a long time to figure out, that, because I'm just so passionate about, like, this space, the information security cyberspace, that, like, I just assume everybody knows as much as I do going into it, or that you don't need to, explain it to them, like the basics of this. So I go in, and then all of a sudden, on the first couple of VC calls, I would just go in and just, using technical terms and, like, just over explaining things. And it took me a while to figure out that I needed to back way off on that initial meeting and just explain things from the beginning. And that resulted in cutting the deck over and over and over again until we got it to a very simple business proposition as to what we were doing.
Gotcha. And if you think about, like, of all the meetings you took, how many people seemed to get serious consideration around it and actually do work, and how many people you got?
Yeah.
Looking back, were there certain signals where the people who got it, where you now look at that meeting and be like, yeah, I could have seen that they were going to get there? And then on the flip side, people who maybe spent some time with you but not getting there, is there any ways that you would have, in hindsight, maybe cut those people off earlier?
I mean, I think naturally the first step is to do research on the people that you're meeting with, right? And just figuring out what their industry is, and what they tend to invest in, what their portfolios look like, and that's. I mean, there's a certain etiquette here as well, right? I mean, when I first started doing this, it's like pretty much doing an interview for the first time, right? You don't really know what's appropriate to ask, what's not appropriate to ask, what the type of questions are that are going to come up. It's just a very different form of conversation that I've never had before. I think for me, we had a lot of interest, but then we would get into a situation where the VCs wouldn't know how to help us, or that they could help us. They saw the vision and they got the idea, but they weren't sure of what their benefit to the company would be. So at the end, what I ended up doing was just asking how they saw themselves if they were to come into the round, and what they could add to it, and coming from, rather than me putting words in their mouth, hearing it from them. And I think that when those things lined up, like the VCs that we do have involved, they were exactly what we were looking for. Whereas the other VCs, we would there would be a misalignment in terms of what the expectations were, so it was really useful for us to hear how they would how the smart money would work, essentially.
Yeah, and I think there's something to that, where when VCs can imagine themselves being an investor in the deal and talk about how they might help, versus
and getting excited about it,
high level. Getting excited about it, like, being really specific about it. I think those are good signals.
Yeah.
So, Rachael, you pivoted, or at least got to sort of I mean, online training was always sort of part of this, right? But at some point, the focus of the company shifted. Can you kind of walk through the period where you're in business, you have some revenue, and you decide that you want to start taking capital and that can really help you get to the next step?
Yeah.
By the way, I'm just going to test to see if I shut my camera off, does that open up bandwidth for you while you're answering the question?
Off mine.
Yeah, we can hear you, but I was trying to see you, but we'll settle for audio. We'll make it, it'll be a part Clubhouse.
Uh, so that was, I have, similar to your story, actually. We have, I always been, was talking about before, teams. Weekend, I got really frustrated. Something like maybe longer, and I was an alpha.
Rachael, I'm going to ask you to pause one moment. I am going to, if you want to turn off your video, I am going to FaceTime you on the phone, and we're going to hack this to make it a little better.
Oh.
There you go.
Echoing?
We can hear you now.
Okay.
Just turn off your mute on the conference line.
Got it. That better?
Yeah, well, at least we can hear and see you now.
Okay. So I basically was able to over a long weekend, build an alpha. I needed to solve this problem.
I got to put this on speaker.
Yeah.
How do I?
This is fun.
Sorry. Mute now. How do I get the phone on speaker? All right, try now. Is that better?
Is that better for everyone?
Can everyone hear her?
I can hear.
Okay, cool. Jump in.
I think maybe, Charlie, you might have to mute your if you have it. So what I did is I built an alpha in a week, including Google quizzes to restaurant workers over WhatsApp. That was our first technology product. And it was working, and people wanted to pay for it. This little thing that I had built. And that was the moment when I decided that I was going to be running a non-profitable business for a while, because we had officially pivoted into SaaS, into software as a service. And I needed a technology officer to help me build it. So I had to raise $250,000 to hire that person. So it was a very difficult decision that I needed to hire, and I needed the capital in order to do it. And in order to achieve that, I sent to about
15 or 20 founders that I really admired. And a lot of founders invest. I didn't know. I just reached out and I said, hey, I could really use some advice. I only targeted founders that had raised institutional capital above a Series B. So I knew that they had some legs around this and kind of knew what they were doing. And the first person I reached out to was Dan Turan, who after the first call ended up emailing me afterward. He was like, hey, I invest. I'd love to be your first check-in if you're interested. And so before I was around, I was just asking for advice. And that led. So my recommendation would be is reach out to other founders who have done it before and ask for advice. Don't ask for money. Some you don't even know that they're investors. But interestingly, a little statistic here, at a little under my cap table is all people that I cold outreach. So it can be done, and I would recommend it. It's a good show of strength and of gut.
Gotcha. Cool. All right, I'm gonna put you down when you're not answering a question. Okay. So, Tiffany, I'd be curious as to like another question that people have is about and the amount of money. You know, how did you pick $1 million? Is that what you initially went out for? And how did you figure out what the goalposts in terms of like what you were going to do with the first $1 million?
Yeah. This is where, advisors, this is where Evan, really came in. I mean, for me, it was at least I had a little bit, I felt like of a privilege in that I already had a company that I had monetized. So I already had an annual membership fee. I had enough to do some numbers. I had a sense of how much it would cost. I didn't know about customer acquisition in terms of paid advertising at that point, but I had a sense of what was required in order to serve her. So part of it was I had onboarded a first class, but then I stopped onboarding. So I had a lot of, just like a little bit of bandwidth to try to figure this out. And then it's an estimate. As you all know, I mean, it's a bit of a crapshoot. You're guessing. It's all guessing. But I felt like $1 million would get me far enough that I'd be able to onboard another class. I really was interested in understanding what the percentage of women that would renew their membership in the crew, because that really factored into, our lifetime value and we're a renewal business. And so they need to renew at least once in order for it to be really worth the while. So I was guessing, but I relied on Evan. I relied on Peter, helped with the amount. So the great thing is once you get people on board who really believe in it, just like Dan, by the way, Dan is an investor in the crew as well. They have a vested interest in supporting you and in helping you. And I'm not someone who claims it all to know all this stuff. So I'm very happy to ask and get the help that I need. And I probably could have taken more. Maybe I should have taken more. It would have gotten us a little bit further, but we raised again the next summer.
Did you not take more because you were concerned about dilution, or you were just like, hey, I'm just tired of fundraising. It's been 4 months.
Tired of fundraising. I was so done with fundraising. I was so done that at the very tail end of the process, someone came in who had a bit of celebrity, like star status, who at the beginning I would have been dying to have in the round. And it didn't align. The person they're an athlete, and it didn't align with like their sports season. They wanted me to wait. And I was like, no way. I really want to be done, because of course the other dirty secret is while you're raising, you're not as focused as you need to be on the business. And I was very eager to get back to actually serving our members.
Gotcha. One other follow-up question I have too is, you mentioned a lot of this as a guess, right? How did you get comfortable with that? I mean, you were saying, hey, we're raising this money to do this thing in the future that you haven't done yet. And, were you concerned or worried at all that like, geez, what if I don't hit these numbers? I'm telling all these VCs I'm going to be the biggest instant sliced bread. Like, what if it doesn't work out? Isn't that a worry?
Yes and no. So it is in the sense that even today, I'm worried and concerned about the numbers. I'm always thinking, I don't think that goes away. I actually think that's part of the process. I think that's part. So it's like getting comfortable, not with you getting confident, but with the uncertainty is what you have to learn to get comfortable with. I think it's more that. But also I had spent a chunk of my career in the nonprofit world, and I had spent about a decade raising nonprofit dollars. And one of the things that I loved about venture capital and about the early startup world was that it truly seemed as if people expected you to get it wrong. That there was even this glorification of, you put a hypothesis out there, you might be wrong. We expect for you to be wrong. Everyone was telling me this, and that was totally counter to what I experienced before in the nonprofit sector, where I raised $1 million from the Ford Foundation, and in 2 years I'd better submit exactly what I did. And I was so enamored with this idea of, I don't have to be exactly right. I just know that every day I need to get up, I need to do my best, I need to act with integrity, I need to keep these people posted on any changes and any learnings. And the thing about investors that I find so incredibly helpful is there's nothing that I'm experiencing that they haven't either experienced themselves because they were a founder, or there isn't a ton of other companies in their portfolio for the time that they've been doing this that's experienced it. So it was really the mind share of, once you start to gain momentum with the investors, I'm an open book in sharing what I don't know. And they've really guided me in a great direction. So no, I'm not certain right now. I don't feel comfortable right now, but I'm getting okay with being uncomfortable.
Gotcha. So Stas, you kind of feel differently. You love fundraising and can't wait to spend even more time on it in the future.
Yeah,
as I recall. So I remember in our conversations that was sort of a bigger issue too, is projection, and like how much to be conservative, how much to be aggressive, what people were sort of looking for. How did you figure out how to balance that?
In terms of the ask, or in terms of the figuring out how much room we have to play with, or like what we're going to do the money with, like what part do you want to?
Just on like projecting out into the future, starting out with coming from like a bootstrapped kind of business.
Yeah. I
mean, you originally asked for an amount of money that is a third of what you wound up raising.
Yeah, that's correct.
So but that part of that was sort of shifting mindset. Yeah. And changing how you were thinking about the future of the business. Yeah,
I mean, I think where Simon and I, the co-founder, what we were initially thinking is, we were going to do this on our own. So we got, we got used to, being the procurement team, the compliance team, the HR team, the finance team, the everything team, and doing everything with pretty massive like learning curves for all of this stuff. And just going back to, what Tiffany was saying before, we were losing sight of what the initial goal of the company was. So when we
initially
started speaking, when we were trying to figure out how much we would bring, it was more, well, how much do we need right now to be able to even being able to get back to looking at the product, or being able to develop what we started the company to do, and then. It was almost like we can release some of this stuff. We don't have to do all of this, and we're not also interested in this part of it. So it was really that calculation of how much do we need to be able to solely focus on what the actual point of this company is and what we're trying to do. And that's where we landed on that. That's where we landed on that number. But it's a weird mindset to get your head around. Because you're just so used to doing everything all the time and just running around, and then just relinquishing some of that control it's quite nice.
So can you talk a little bit about so we'll start to get into like actually getting yeses and that process. So I wound up putting up a term sheet, and you went out to some folks. How did and in particular, like I'll say this as nicely as possible, there was a range of levels of due diligence in this process among investors. For some investors that required more to sort of get them over the hump, what do you think was some of the most useful information that you provided them that sort of was most convincing about your company?
I think the fact that one, our team is really strong. We know this area or this space, and this is all what we're doing, and we also have a revenue stream. So I think that was quite important just to get the initial interest, because I think in the tech space there's so many tech companies that exist. So we have to stand out from in one way or another. I think in terms of in terms of getting a yes, I think it's really like for us, if there was a next step with the VC, they'd want to see what the business plan was, and they'd want to see. I mean, they were interested in seeing the business plan and where we were according to that business plan in our journey. And I think that was really important for us. Also, in our space, having a competitor analysis was really important. Was really important for us as well, and just showing how we differ from others in this space, and how we plan on getting market share.
That was another question too that people had a lot of questions about. Like, you're in a space where there are a lot of companies, and
Yep.
and at least the investors who said yes would argue that what you do is different and not necessarily the same thing.
Yep.
How did you separate that out to say, this isn't solved? You can Google around and find a bunch of companies, but they're different.
Yeah, I mean, for us, it's a bit different, right? Because we're building a product that we're essentially going to be using. So we know that it's useful. Just getting that message across to the VCs and anyone that we're pitching to, that unlike the competitors that might exist in our space, they're point solutions that people buy because they're trying to solve a problem that they don't fully understand. And if you go and talk to those companies that actually have bought a similar product, you'll find out that it's not. It's either not configured correctly, or they stopped using it, or it's on the way out. And I mean, just speaking of levels of due diligence, we had one of our one of the VCs. They went to the ends of the earth to do due diligence on this part. And it was just really important for us to be able to clearly demonstrate how we stood out, and why our model is sustainable, and why we get repeat business, and that it would essentially be very difficult to get us out once we got into the organization.
Rachel, I'm going to ask you a slightly different question. Can you hear us?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. What was the biggest question when you went out to pitch of the folks who said no? What was there any consistency in terms of why they said no, and how do you think you were able to get the folks that said yes over the hump?
For the
Good.
Oh,
Maybe it's my end.
It's her connection.
Yeah.
Nope, he's back.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Should I start over?
Yeah, sorry.
So for the pre-seed, one was market size. And because we food industry, a lot of folks, if you don't work in the food industry, don't have a full grasp of that. For us, it was a unique problem initially, because I started to raise my seed in March of 2020, which, if all of you remember, was exactly the date when country shut down and investors stopped cutting checks for about 45 days. So our biggest challenge was kind of cutting through the noise of current events just to get in front of people. Once we got past that, I think the biggest question mark was it came back to the market size question. But because of that, and because of that trend, I was able to better prepare for each meeting. And I tried and iterated on different pitches and different slides that could help make the argument of why this industry is an important one, why it's a massive, and why we're starting there.
Gotcha. So, Tiffany, what was the biggest question for the folks that for the folks that said no? Why do you think they said no? And do you think there's anything you could have told them, or was it just like the people who said yes got it and they didn't get it? Or was there anything about the pitch that you think won people over that you didn't get on the no side?
Yeah. So I think it depends on the dynamics. And part of it has to do with identity as well. I went into it knowing that very, very few people like me, very few women and very few Black women raise venture. So to me, the biggest hurdle, believe it or not, was just getting them to believe that I could pull it off. And I felt like if I could convince them that I could actually pull this off, that I would be 60% there. What Rachael said about the market, I think, is really important because the investor community likes comps. They like comparisons. It's kind of, I'm an author, and when I was selling my book, all of the editors were like, we like this. This is a combination of lean in and battle him of the tiger mom. And I'd be like, my book isn't anything like any of those things. But I quickly learned that the investors are like that too. And the two companies that the crew is lumped in with are the Wing and Chief. Even though if you looked at our business models, the crew it's not either one of them. It's actually more of a Weight Watchers than it is the Wing or Chief. But I kind of figured out there's whatever people are talking about, whatever the momentum is, I need to place the crew within that. So if someone was in the category of a no, but they had, or somebody had accepted the meeting. So I should say there's the quick no, which I have the most respect for, which is they don't even waste your time because they either think that they have a conflict or they're not interested. It's not in their space. That's the best no, because you don't have to spend any time on them. But the ones that I think said no or why I couldn't get them there was either they really believed that one of these other companies was going to take it over and take the market. In my biased opinion, because they thought of women, which are half the population, as the niche market, whereas I feel like there's much room for half the population. And so if they really believed that somebody else was going to take it, then they were like, I don't want to place a bet on this. Or they really had a hard time with the scale aspect. They felt that this was human connection. They really wanted to see more members. They really wanted to see people renew. They just couldn't get there on scale. The ones that said yes talked a lot about founder market fit. They believed that Tiffany was the perfect person that could do this and that could pull this off. They had FOMO because they hadn't invested in one of the other ones. And so they were like, let me place a bet in this category, even though I didn't know how to say, I don't even think this is the same category, but there was some of that as well. But the no's, it was scale, or they just didn't think I could do it.
Gotcha. I'm going to ask this, pretty specific and direct question. Because you brought up, the percentages of who tends to raise venture and what that landscape looks like. Were there meetings where you walked out and clearly, obviously, your service is for a population of women, so it would be difficult to imagine a white guy raising money for your particular business. But absent that, did you feel like there were some meetings where had you been somebody else, the meeting would have gone differently?
Well, statistically, the answer is yes. Obviously, yes.
I'm asking you how you felt.
Well, you're asking someone who's spent their entire life being other. So for me, the idea of someone not necessarily seeing me or seeing that, that's kind of like part of the experience. So Yes, but if that experience, yes, I did feel that, but that's not unique to the investment world, the venture capital world. That's just America. That's just the world. I wouldn't say that it was unique. But I think the point there is you don't want to take investment from someone who has doubts in that realm. And in fact, this past summer in raising the seed was very tricky because towards the end of the raise, this whole resurgence of Black Lives Matter kind of bubbled up. And all of a sudden, Black founders were all the rage. And I was very hesitant to take meetings and engage in conversations with people who hadn't met with me before, I couldn't get a meeting with before, but who, were newly woke, so to speak. So, this is a very long haul partnership, in the thick of it relationship that you're embarking on with people. You want people who would have invested in you anyway. And so I think it's really important if you can actually weed out and be discerning about who's really going to be there and who's really going to support you and who can be authentic in that. I think that's important.
Gotcha. Rachael, I'm going to ask you a last question, or the first of the sort of last round. Now that you have investment, how does that change things? I mean, obviously you can make some hires and do some things you couldn't do, but just in terms of being a founder that now has people on your cap table, that now potentially has board members, for those of you in the audience who are sort of worried about what it means to bring somebody on, and I don't know if you had those questions or doubts sort of going in, what has that experience of having investors on the cap table meant for you?
It's been great. It took some time to learn the best way to manage that group of people. I've raised $2.5 million, and most of that is venture capital, but we have about 10 angel investors, and they're all strategic, and they all work in the food industry or in Stas, or they're all well connected, and they're lovely humans. But what I have learned is that I now have this really incredible resource. All of these humans are rooting for us. Not going to continue to root for us if we don't keep them well informed about what's happening in the business. So you get your first investor, whether it's a $5,000 check from your ANA or $50,000 check from that you pulled outreach to, that's when you need to start building a communication cadence with those people so that they can continue to help you. So I think what I have learned is to develop sophistication, or that communication looks like, making sure I'm reporting on the right metrics, asking for feedback really directly, and not, I think everybody does it differently, but I am really specific about my asks. So I never call up an investor and say, hey, let's just catch up for 30 minutes. It's always I have this specific question I'm trying to answer. I'd really love to connect. And that has kept me really focused as a founder too, so that I'm always trying to solve the most burning problem in the business at all times. Gotcha.
Thank you. Tiffany, how do you sort of manage this group and interact with them, and now that you have investors?
Yes, I agree with Rachael that it's just been a priceless. I went into it thinking that I wanted their money, but what's been actually most valuable is their experience and their support. I send a monthly update via email to all of our investors. Bloomberg Beta had a template, and I just basically took their template and used that. I've tweaked it a little bit. I then have regular monthly meetings with key investors. I rotate them. So every Monday I have a check-in with at least one of our investors. I'm the only board member of the crew. So those regular phone calls with investors are really important to me. And then I kind of pretend that some of them are my board members, and I do have group meetings twice a year. I bring them together, I give them an update, and I kind of get their strategic advice about what to do next. But I would not have gotten this far if it weren't for their counsel, their advice. They help me source talent. They help me with partnerships. We decided to do kind of some experimentation on the B2B side. They made introductions. And I'll never forget at the top of March, when at the same time that Rachael said everything was shut down, was the time when I knew that I was going to have to go out and raise. And I was having a conversation with Karen Klein at Bloomberg Beta. And I just said, Karen, just give it to me straight, because she always does anyway. Do you think we can do this? Like, do you think we can pull this off? Or am I going crazy here? And she looked at me through Zoom and she says, Tiffany, if there's a founder who can raise right now, it's you. You're top 1%. Now, that is probably some line from some investor handbook that you all have, pep talks to your founders, but I totally fell for it. I wrote it down. I posted that on my wall, and that got me through, the raise this summer. So I wouldn't be here without them. I have a bit of a pixie fairy dust relationship that I know is not, there are a lot of founders who don't have that kind of relationship, but I found them to just be invaluable.
Gotcha. Cool. Well, listen, I really, really big congratulations to everybody around the table for their journeys and just getting through this far in, not an easy period by any stretch of the imagination. And I appreciate you guys coming on. So Rachael, I'm going to put you down for a moment. So you can sort of dial back in. What we're going to do, we have a few, I think there's six investors that are going to jump into the floor plan room at 4:00. And so for those of you in the audience that are raising, have questions, and all of that sort of stuff, will be, they'll be able to answer some questions. Maybe you could just get some high-level feedback on what you're up to. But I do want to open it up to questions from the audience. So if anybody either wants to use there are a bunch of questions. Gotcha. So we have some questions. I didn't even see those. Sorry, this is the first bigger group that we're doing on Remo. So we're just kind of learning the platform a little bit. So there's a question about like seed versus pre-seed. Tiffany, I'm going to ask you about that. You raised a pre-seed, raised a seed. First of all, like, how did you decide what to call each? Like, how much, because there are some people who say, well, $1 million, that's a pretty decent amount of money. Is that a seed? How did you sort of navigate your way around that landscape? And did you find that the seed raise was different than the pre-seed?
Yes, they were different. I initially went out to raise a seed. It was Peter at BetaWorks who said, don't call it a seed. He said, call it a pre-seed. He said, it will give you more time. He gave me a rationale. He said, it's going to give you more time. If you call it a seed, the next step is a Series A. There's so much more that you're going to have to approve out. So call it a pre-seed so we can help you build this. Then there'll be a seed. It will just take the pressure off of you. I said, okay, I that made sense to me. So that was how we came up with what to call it. And I'm so grateful now in hindsight that we did that. They were very different in that I obviously had raised once before and had learned a lot from that process. So first of all, I waited. I basically spent more time collecting the list of names. I went out to almost 80 investors for the seed. And I spent a lot more time up front collecting all of the names of the people that I wanted to go out to, getting organized, letting the people who had either made the introduction or were going to make the introduction know. I actually created a column that had their name next to it. I spent a lot more time up front working on the messaging. What was the story? What were we going to say? I did not change the deck nearly as many times. So there was just a lot more pre-work, because when I went out, just like Stas was talking about, I didn't want to have to do this drip and drab of talking to one person and like stretching out the process. I wanted to just kind of go out to as many people as possible, as quickly as possible, so that I could build that momentum. So those were some of the differences. I mean, there was a viral pandemic. Unfortunately, I contracted COVID, so I was not doing well, but fortunately we were doing this virtually, so I could kind of lie down and then get up and keep going. And the other thing I'll say is, the pandemic created this really incredible opportunity for our business. We had to, I mean, everyone was pivoting at the same time that they were raising. And we had initially had our crews meeting in person. Obviously, we had to move to a virtual model. And I discovered that the virtual model worked better. It allowed us to open up the floodgates to match women by time zone instead of by city, by geography, which meant that we had a lot more to pull from. So we basically opened it up to any woman in the continental US. And that gave us a lot of traction. So in the wake of the pandemic, we were actually growing. And that was very helpful for the raise as well.
Gotcha. Courtney asked a question to Tiffany, but I'll also open that up to Stas as well. What was your process for sort of refining the story? And, you know, as you were doing the pitches, getting some feedback, like what was that iteration process like?
Yeah, it's a really great question. Obviously, most of the people you meet with are not going to invest, but everyone that you meet with has a perspective. So basically, I would refine by listening really carefully as early as possible. So I would wrap up my pitch in 8 to 10 minutes, no more than 10 minutes, so that I could spend the rest of the time asking questions and listening to their perspective on the business. Because to me, that was going to be the value of the meeting. I knew most of them were not going to invest. And then I took copious notes. And at the end of the week, because I didn't have time to do it every night, I basically read all of them. And I pulled out everything that everybody said that was in common or the same. You know, everybody's gonna have a different opinion, but like if 5 investors in 5 separate meetings tell you something, that there's probably some cred to that. I also let people interrupt if they wanted to. So if during the pitch you had a question, I encouraged people to just stop me. And I did that because I wanted to know at what point when I was talking that question surfaced for that person. So that's the benefit of the fundraising process, is you can learn in the process of it. I don't know any other way to refine a story than to tell the story and observe someone's response to it. I can't do it in the mirror.
Yep.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
I'm going to jump in here as well. I think that's spot on. I wish I limited it to 10 minutes, but I mean, we very rarely made it past the 3rd or 4th slide to when we were doing a pitch. We would just get bombarded I'd get bombarded with questions, and but I took very meticulous notes as well. I had a Google sheet going about all the questions that we're asking and seeing where the overlap was, and pretty much very similar to what you said, Tiffany. Like at the end of the week, we would literally look at that deck again and recut that deck to the point where we would have like 3 decks, where one would be an introductory deck, and then it would be more detailed technical deck, and then a further due diligence deck. So depending on what they wanted to see, we were trying to cover off all the bases in the call, and just trying to eliminate us from their radar as quickly as possible if they weren't interested. But I mean, as you said, also, as you said, the best answer is a quick no. But we got pretty extensive feedback. Like I know a lot of people either just get a no or little feedback, but we actually got quite a lot, which was actually really useful to us. And throughout this whole process, we actually got we've had a couple clients that were interested in the actual not investing, but were actually interested in the product. So that was a nice surprise.
Gotcha. Cool. All right, I'm going to give everybody about 10 or 15 minutes in the lobby before we have our investor guests come through. So also give everybody a chance to meet each other, which used to happen when we showed up for events in person. So always good to be able to get a chance to meet folks. And Stas, Rachael, Tiffany, thanks so much for spending time with us.
No problem. And I see a
Thank
few
you.
questions. I'm more than happy to answer any other questions. I'm at Tiffany@thecrew.com.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah, same.
Yep, likewise. Feel free to reach out.
All right.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
All right.
Bye.
So when you go back to the floor plan room, you can jump into any table you want. And feel free to mingle around. It's not rude to leave a table, and we'll find some way to let everybody know where the investors come in when they come in at 4.